we must go to Sandra JOVCHELOVITCH and do the neuropsychology of public sphere.
Thank you, Nico. Would you allow me to share my screen?
Of course, Sandra, you can do it.
Excellent. Here we go. Thank you very much, colleagues, for this invitation. I would try very hard to stay within my time. It's a great honor and it's a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you today. And I would like to thank, in particular, Nikos and Stamos for inviting me to be here today, as well as Denise and Saji for helping to organize this event. It's really an act of resistance, and it's wonderful to be here. What I would like to do today is to return to a theme that has been concerning me for quite a long time in my professional and academic career. As a Brazilian, as someone living in the UK today, or just globally, I think we have many reasons to continue a reflection on the public sphere, and especially try to resist a temptation to despair with the state of the polis today. So my talk today is an attempt to understand the new polis, as well as the truth and consequences of the doxa that we find in the polis today. And I'm using this, I think we would be in Athens if this conference would have been face-to-face. So in a way, this is also an homage to Athens and to the beauty of our tradition. I want to start by reflecting on something that I think is very central to social representations, which is the understanding that our common ground is absolutely essential to understand who we are. Humans are social as well as highly individualized organisms. And social representations theory understand that thinking together and thinking alone are fundamentally interconnected. Thinking together, the collective mind is a driver of togetherness itself, and at the same time depends on togetherness and the ways in which it is enacted. That demonstrates from the very beginning this connection between self and social representations, if you will, between the fundamental problem of social psychology, that is the relationship between the individual and the social. Moscovici, I think, gave us this legacy of understanding that the mind is in the public sphere. He concentrated on how ideas and knowledge move from one domain to another. A central problem for him, which I think he discussed with Nico in his last public appearance, was how popular knowledge becomes science, or how o saber culture and incult knowledge becomes a cultivated knowledge, and how publics understand and transform issues that matter both to themselves as individuals and to public spheres. So I think to understand the truth and the consequences of doxa as it moves and circulates with human beings in common spaces of conversation and action is very central to our field. And as Professor Jesuino just demonstrated beautifully, is not only the light truth of doxa, but sometimes the rather dark truth of doxa, which Moscovici addressed in his magisterial work on crowds, but also on totalitarianism, on the Dreyfus affair. This is something that he understood very well. So I want to return to this theories of the public sphere to examine what is happening today. Let me start by just recapping what theories of the public sphere have to say. The public realm is our common world, is a sphere where citizens talk to each other in a fashion that guarantees access to all. It's the ultimate brainstorming hub, if we go back to the ancient Greeks, but also if we stay with Hannah Arendt and Habermas, more than anyone, I think Hannah Arendt, who problematized the public sphere as a space not only where we build our common ground, but a space also for speech and action where we reveal what is unique about each one of us. So this dialectics between a common ground and selfhood, again, between the individual and the social, is present in contemporary theories of the public sphere. It was present certainly in the classic understanding of the public sphere, and in my view, is the unit of analysis of social representations. This is the triangle that Moscovici left us as a basic model of the social mind, of how self and other in communication in relation to an object build social representations, or the making of the social mind is also a way of making the world, of making our understanding of the world, constructs a we type of cognition that goes well beyond the individual thinking, between individual thinking inside the head. So this relationship between public spheres and social representations has always been very central to the theory and for the practice. I think there has been a wealth of work in following this tradition that has tried to understand, both at the level of microgenesis and macrogenesis, how this interrelations between self, other, and objects build representations and at the same time build public spheres. Many of the most important phenomena, I think, we address in social psychology are related to this interface between our experience of plurality and common ground and our experience of uniqueness and plurality. These things are fundamentally related. So it's keeping this in mind, I think, that we can start to think with Moscovici how changes in social thinking change the nature of a public sphere. So if we go back to his original work, we will see that the move from collective to social representations expressed, in fact, new architectures of community and representation that Moscovici was observing, as he stated in 1988 very clearly in a very interesting paper. The changing words was intended to express a real change in the nature of society and in the process of production of knowledge, so that as we transition from a more tradition-dominated society, a more homogeneous society, to conditions of late modernity, we need to have a new focus, a focus on creative processes, on the generation of the new, of making the unfamiliar, that was much closer to us now, familiar, on representations that arise from processes of social interaction and communication between very different people. So this is a quote that I take from Tony Blair, British Prime Minister in the early 2000s, when he gives a speech to the Labour Party, emphasizing precisely this plurality of representations. You know, he talks a baby is born, the father takes a photo on his mobile, in second, relatives around the world can see it, can celebrate. And he goes on to talk about the character of this changing world, which is indifferent to tradition, which is unforgiving of frailty, which has no respect for past reputations. It has no custom and practice. What was the impetus of that speech in the UK in 2005? The impetus was globalization. But as we know, since then, we have experienced a very bitter harvest between the initial utopias of early globalization and the world we live today. We can see a cultural backlash expressed in the return and rise of authoritarian populism. We can see the way in which inequalities have deepened around the world. We can see the way in which the internet, initially an utopian territory, has actually become dystopian as algorithms, surveillance, and monetary control transform and dull the initial enthusiasm that guided all of us. So how to make sense of these transformations? What is shaping the new public sphere? I think we need to ask again, what is happening to our common ground and to social knowledge and to the self. So the first argument that I will put forward, and that's drawing on the sociological work that has been studying this very carefully, is that the new public sphere is actually centered around digital media. It's a sphere of networked individuals. It is global, but that's not necessarily new. But it's also, and this is very important, horizontal and peer-to-peer. Is a new form of public life that bypasses territories and bypasses institutions to produce a novel, very novel form of relating between self and other that is entirely unmediated, that is directed. So this is something important, and Castells has described this beautifully, not only because of the new form of peer interaction it enables, but also because of its global character. It affects the whole planet. Even people who are not participating in it get affected by it. So peer-to-peer, global, horizontal is central to understand this public sphere. The second aspect, here I just give some, for you to have an idea. Today we have 4.66 billion active internet users. The global internet penetration is 60%. And it's not something that we should take lightly, but the average daily time is spent per capita with the internet is between 2011 to 2021, as you can see, is a progressive line. And even though this is important, we need to keep in mind that it's very unequally distributed. Here you can see the percentage of individuals using the internet. It goes all the way, almost 100% in the developed world, to 19% in the least developed countries. So the internet is here. These networks of peer-to-peer communication are here. The second aspect that I want to identify in this new public sphere is that it's a public sphere that is multimodal in digital content. That means to say, it produces not only text, it produces image, it produces many modalities of content. So it challenges profoundly the symbolic content of representations, and its sources are open. They can be downloaded, they can be formatted, and they can be reformatted. And importantly, it is self-generated. Individuals and communities can self-generate content. They can self-generate emission. They can self-generate reception. So not only the new internet is peer-to-peer, but it also places a huge amount of power in the self-generation of content. There are multiple representations everywhere being produced by everyone. I give you one example that I like very much because I think it's funny. During the pandemic here, we have one of the Oxford primary care professors becoming a kind of public intellectual, and she tweeted just after Donald Trump apparently said back in November 2020, I came up with vaccines. To which he responded, and I am on the front cover of Vogue. Now, for those of you who know Tricia, that was unlikely, but hey ho, the internet did just that. Less than 24 hours later, she was in the front cover of Vogue, telling everyone that Kate Moss had taught me everything I know about primary health care. And then she concluded, I actually belong on the cover of Vogue. So this is just a very small example of the self-generation of self-generated content and the fact that the new media and the participatory web are hyper-connected and unbounded. Yet, and that's where we start to think about the psychology of this, it's also more individually controlled, therefore paradoxically more fragmented and homogeneous. And the question we need to ask is whether this is empowering or undermining its vitality, the vitality of the public sphere. The evidence I have reviewed is inconclusive. Many studies looking at that, and what we find are really contradictory facts, mainly organized around the idea that this can obviously be tremendously empowering, but it can also lead to a form of debate that is controlled only by elites, that discriminates against minor publics. Big data, as we know, has is a double-edged sword, amplifies the tyranny of the minority. So the evidence on how this new networked public sphere is affecting its vitality is inconclusive. I cannot resist to mention the work in the favelas of Brazil, where we have seen how new actors in context of extreme deprivation are able to use new social media, bypass traditional media, bypass governments to project into the public sphere a new agenda and a new social identity about who they are, and especially how they want to be seen and who they want to be. So very, very strong potentials there. And yet the story I have to tell, I think, tends to be to more dystopia. We know that, for instance, the internet can be sexist and racist. This is just one example. This paper came out in Nature 2 years ago, showing that algorithms are just trained on very biased databases. They will recognize only the left-hand image as a bride. They will not recognize the other part of the picture. So what is happening to social representations under these conditions? What is happening to social knowledge when artifacts supporting communication, such as social media platforms, skew the triangle of mediation towards the self? And at the same time, offer massive amounts of free information to centralize economic power? Well, the answer is that the dynamic of social representational formation changes, and the dynamic of self-other interaction also changes, not to mention the economy, of course, because attention economists use everyday epistemics very wisely, although this is something that I cannot discuss here. So it's important to understand that this triangle is not only destabilized internally, but it's being very, very closely observed by economies of attention that are trying to not only use it, but also manipulate it, and they do, as we're going to discuss. So the first aspect that I want to raise in relation to what this new internet is doing to the epistemological triangle is that it's moving us from communities of attention to a situation of fragmentation. If we look at the history of social media, we're going to see, in these pictures can tell us very clearly how the triangle of communication and mediation, the epistemic triangle, has been kept more or less intact by keeping communities of attention, by keeping self and other connected to a single source, which they had to attend to. Now, this obviously has changed a lot. If we look at the device that people are using in the internet today, is the mobile, is not the desktop anymore. And this picture says it all about the difference that the mobile, the portable form of communication is doing today. What is happening to the triangle today is that instead of having a community of attention, we have a disruption where self relates to a private object, even though it's connected and bounded to others virtually. It is focusing its attention in a private object. And the common object of attention is disrupted. This personalization of public space, also connects to an increase in polarization. And that's the second aspect of this new psychology. It's not only that we are having a fragmentation of attention, but we are also having a profound, perhaps as never before, personalization of public space that is leading, paradoxically, to an increase in polarization. So researchers in urban studies and in communication have described the dominance of this portable, private, personal territory, a space in which an individual, through the use of a technological device, can extend his personal space, creating a very complex matrix of social spheres and interactions that are nevertheless entirely centered on the self. The self customizes its interaction to chosen publics and content. The self perfects and individually designs what we want to know and how we're going to project itself, producing something that these researchers call a network individualism. You can see here how the self has a porous boundary. I tried to capture this graphically. The self has a porous boundary with the virtual public sphere, and yet a very thick boundary with the physical public sphere, just as in the photo we saw of the kids sitting next to each other, and yet everyone controlling their phones. We all have experiences of that, of being with other people and yet being inside our phones rather than being with other people. That's an experience that is very much part of this early 21st century. So the personalization of public experience, individual design inside the virtual public sphere, the self-controlling and the individuation its communicative universe leads to what Tucker described as people wanting to be alone with their personal networks. They are in their personal networks, but they want to be alone. People seek and distribute information in ways that are self-referential and actually shut out opposing views while reinforcing pre-existing beliefs. People are less likely to change their minds and engage with others who are different from them. So this situation of individual design is also something that produces the polarization we witness, because as the self shuts down from its immediate public sphere, controls its exposure, controls how and what communicates, controls what wants to know, the self is connected, but it's entirely isolated. It's networked, but without shared attention, and especially protecting itself from unanticipated topics, uncontrolled point of views. When you're texting, you're really in control of what you're letting yourself see or what you're allowing others to do. It's a very different dynamic and regime of communication. And yet, I cannot but refer to that. The self is in control, but not really, because there are new surveillance practices in the public sphere where location-aware technologies are producing top-down and bottom-up surveillance. Our phones, our devices are informing on us, and we are doing the data entry, actually. We are digital slaves because we're not only being watched, but we're being actually used in terms of the data that we can provide so that someone can gain something else. So alone, yet with a lot of surveillance on us. So this dynamics produces a hardening of societal thinking by increasing rigid oppositions between representations. It leads to a lot of polarization between polemic representations, decrease of our common ground because people are inside their bubbles, and less space for emancipating representations from their groups of origin, if we take into account Moscovici's original formulation about the plurality of representations. Now, within this context, what happens to selfhood? As we know, we are witnessing an epidemic of mental illness, certainly in the developed West. This is just an example of cases of anxiety disorder by WHO origin or cases of depressive disorder. These pathologies of compare, there is a new form of vulnerability that is triggered by excessive exposure and visibility in the public sphere. And this act of watching how others watch us is definitely entwining identity, and especially teenagers and children, into a network where pathologies of comparison are becoming predominant. And not only that, but more in an even more dystopian way. If you look at the work of Rosa, for instance, on social acceleration, we are going to see that this paradox of technological change leads to a time famine in Western societies where we're featuring more and more and more in less time, speeding up so as to know more.